My husband, my beloved Julian, slapped me across the face in front of all the guests at his mother's anniversary gala. I stood there, utterly humiliated, my cheek burning, watching as everyone in the room quickly averted their eyes. Not a single person dared to defend me. His parents were powerful, influential members of high society, and everyone was terrified of getting on their bad side. But neither Julian nor his arrogant family could have ever suspected that sitting in the shadows at a distant table was my real father, a man I hadn't seen in 20 years and whom I had presumed to be long gone. And while the Sterlings reveled in my public disgrace, my father, with a single phone call, was already freezing all their assets, setting off a chain of events that would change absolutely everything. I remember perfectly how carefully I had chosen my dress for my mother-in-law Margaret's 60th birthday celebration. It was an elegant sky blue silk evening gown that draped softly over my figure, highlighting my youth. I wanted to look flawless, not for myself but for them, for this elite family I had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to fit into. When Julian saw me, he sighed with genuine admiration. "Lily, you look absolutely gorgeous. My mother is going to be thrilled." He pulled me into a hug, but I could see a familiar shadow of anxiety in his eyes. He, much like myself, always became a nervous wreck before seeing his parents. Harrison and Margaret Sterling were the epitome of old money, successful, incredibly wealthy, and ruthlessly demanding, especially when it came to their only son and his life choices. To them, I was just a simple girl, an orphan raised by a single mother who worked as a seamstress to make ends meet. They never said it out loud, but I felt it in every calculating look and every condescending gesture. The venue they had chosen to celebrate Margaret's milestone was one of the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants in Manhattan, boasting panoramic views of Central Park. There were towering crystal chandeliers, crisp white linen tablecloths, and waiters wearing white gloves. The guest list matched the opulence of the room, men in bespoke tailored tuxedos, women draped in designer haute couture and heavy diamonds. I felt like a common daisy, planted in the middle of a greenhouse full of rare exotic orchids. Julian held my hand under the table, but his palm was sweating. He constantly scanned the room for his parents, desperately trying to gauge their approval or disapproval. I spent the entire evening sitting rigidly by his side, barely touching my filet mignon, offering polite smiles to the endless stream of toasts honoring the birthday woman. The elite crowd praised Margaret's timeless beauty, her wisdom, and her cutthroat business acumen. I, however, wanted to talk about something different. Something all these Wall Street executives and socialites didn't see the son she had raised my Julian. I had prepared a short speech, rehearsing it for days, so that the words would sound sincere and heartfelt. When the formal speeches seemed to be winding down, I gathered my courage. I stood up and gently clinked my crystal champagne flute with a silver knife. Julian looked up at me, panic flashing across his face. "Lily, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. "I just want to say a few words." I smiled, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The grand dining room fell completely silent. Every eye in the room zeroed in on me. "Dearest Margaret," I began, my voice trembling. "Just a fraction. Many people have spoken tonight about your incredible successes and your achievements, but I want to thank you for what I believe is your greatest accomplishment, your son. Thank you for raising such a kind, honest, and loving man. I am so unbelievably lucky to be his wife, and that is entirely a credit to you. I raise my glass to you." I saw a few of the older women in the room smile softly with genuine tenderness. They clearly appreciated the sentiment, but Margaret's face remained practically carved from ice. She didn't even reach for her glass. Instead, she turned her head slowly toward me and spoke in a voice that was soft, yet sharp enough to cut glass and loud enough for the entire table to hear. "My dear, save the tacky Hallmark sentiments for middle-class family dinners. There is no need to bore high society with your childish monologues." My face burned as if a pot of boiling water had been thrown over me. I felt the familiar sting of tears welling up in my eyes. Julian yanked hard on my wrist. "Sit down, Lily. Please just sit down," he muttered through gritted teeth. But I couldn't move. The humiliation was paralyzing. I just wanted to speak from the heart," I stammered, staring wide-eyed at my mother-in-law. "Nobody here cares about your heart," Margaret declared flatly. In that split second, Julian stood up abruptly. I looked at him with a sudden surge of hope, thinking that he was finally going to stand up for me to defend his wife. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring dead ahead at his father, Harrison, who was fixing him with a heavy, suffocating glare of absolute disappointment. In Julian's eyes, I saw pure terror. Fear of his father, fear of disappointing his mother, fear that my little speech had ruined his standing in the family empire. He whipped around to face me, his features contorted with sudden misplaced rage. "I told you to keep your mouth shut. You just had to sit there, smile, and look pretty. Why can't you ever just listen?" he spat. And before I could even process his words, his hand slashed through the air. The crack of the slap seemed louder than the jazz quartet playing in the background. A sharp, stinging pain exploded across my cheek, but the internal agony was 1,000 times worse. The world around me simply stopped. The music faded out, the low hum of conversation vanished. I stood there in the center of that magnificent ballroom, with hundreds of eyes glued to me. The red welt of my husband's handprint burned into my skin. Yet no one said a single word. People awkwardly averted their gaze, suddenly fascinated by the embroidery on the tablecloths, or the arrangement of their silverware. They were cowards. They were too afraid of damaging their lucrative connections with the almighty Sterling family to intervene. Margaret took a slow sip of her vintage champagne, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Harrison gave his son a curt nod, silently approving of his violent correction. And Julian just stared at me with total chilling detachment, as if I were a stranger who had just spilled wine on his shoes. My heart shattered. I realized with absolute clarity that I was alone, entirely alone against all of them. I scanned the room, taking in the sea of indifferent, cowardly faces. And suddenly, my eyes locked onto a man sitting in the shadows of the furthest corner booth. He was the only person who hadn't looked away. He was staring directly at me. His face was unfamiliar, but something in his expression, a profound ancient sorrow, mixed with a spark of recognition, pierced straight through my soul. He didn't look merely shocked or scandalized. He looked utterly resolute. As I watched him, unable to break eye contact, he calmly, deliberately pulled a smartphone from the inner pocket of his tailored suit. Never taking his eyes off me, he began typing rapidly. I turned on my heel and walked. I didn't run. I didn't cry out. I just walked steadily toward the grand mahogany exit doors, feeling the weight of 100 stairs on my back. Every step felt like wading through thick mud. The sky-blue silk dress that had made me feel so beautiful an hour ago now felt alien, a costume that didn't belong to me. "Lily, stop. Where the hell do you think you're going?" Julian's voice echoed behind me. He caught up to me just as I reached the doors, gripping my elbow. His fingers dug into my flesh like a vice. "What is wrong with you? Get back to the table and apologize to my mother right now." "Stop making a scene," he hissed into my ear. I turned my head slowly and looked him dead in the eyes. I didn't see an ounce of remorse or compassion in his gaze, only raw anger and a pathetic, groveling fear of his parents. Quietly, I wrenched my arm out of his grasp. "Never touch me again," I said, my voice low, but laced with enough venom to make him freeze. I pushed open the heavy brass-handled doors and stepped out into the freezing darkness of the New York night. The biting winter wind whipped against my bare shoulders and chilled my tear-stained cheeks. I walked aimlessly down the deserted city blocks, having no idea where to go. I had no cash, no credit cards, and no phone. Everything was still sitting in my small clutch on the back of my chair in the restaurant. I had nowhere to turn. My mother had passed away 5 years ago, and she was the only real family I'd ever known. I had friends, sure, but I couldn't bear the thought of showing up on their doorsteps in the middle of the night dressed in a ball gown to recount the most humiliating moment of my life. Tears streamed freely down my face, mixing with my ruined makeup. I remembered my early days with Julian. He had seemed so attentive, so caring. He bought me flowers, took me on romantic dates to indie cinemas, and promised he would protect me forever. Where was that man now? Had he ever really existed? Or had I spent the last few years living in a fantasy world with a man who didn't love me, but merely loved the submissive, moldable image his parents permitted him to keep? The cold was seeping into my bones. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying desperately to conserve body heat, and only then realized how violently I was shivering. Suddenly, a sleek, dark town car pulled smoothly up to the curb beside me. The tinted window rolled down, and I saw the stranger from the corner table. "Miss, you need help. Get in, you're going to freeze to death," he said, his voice deep, gravelly, and remarkably calm. I took a step back, my heart pounding with fear. "Don't be afraid. I saw what happened in there. I'm not going to hurt you," he added. There was something in his tone that inspired an irrational, immediate sense of trust. He stepped out of the idling car, took off his heavy cashmere overcoat, and draped it gently over my shoulders. The luxurious fabric smelled of expensive cologne and something strangely achingly familiar. "My name is William. Please let me take you somewhere warm so you can get some coffee. You need to sit down." I hesitated for only a second. Freezing on the pavement was no longer an option. I nodded silently and slid into the leather passenger seat. The interior of the car was intensely warm and quiet. William drove smoothly and confidently through the empty streets, not pressing me with any unnecessary questions. He pulled up to a classic, glowing 2-4-hour diner in a quieter borough outside the city center. We slid into a vinyl booth by the window. He ordered 2 hot chocolates and a slice of cherry pie. I wrapped my numb fingers around the thick ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into my skin. "My name is Lily," I finally managed to whisper. "I know," William replied softly. He was looking at me with an intensity and a melancholy that made my chest tight. "How do you know me? Have we met before?" I asked, confused. He shook his head slowly. "No, but I knew your mother, Mary." I stopped breathing. Nobody called her that. To the world, she was just a quiet seamstress. "We were very close a long time ago," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out an old, worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a faded, dog-eared Polaroid photograph and slid it across the Formica table. In the picture was a young, radiant woman with a bright smile, her hair pulled back into a simple braid. It was my mother. And standing right beside her, with his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, was a young man. A man with the exact same eyes as the one sitting across from me now. "I should have looked for you sooner, Lily. Please forgive me," he said. And then it all clicked into place. All the air vanished from my lungs. "You." I breathed out, unable to comprehend the reality of my own words. "You're my father." At that exact moment, back in the opulent Manhattan restaurant, the birthday gala was finally winding down. The elite guests were retrieving their coats and showering Margaret with sycophantic praises. Harrison Sterling, looking exceedingly smug and authoritative, snapped his fingers for the maitre d' to bring the check. The evening had been a resounding success in his eyes. The embarrassing little outburst from his daughter-in-law had been swiftly handled. His son had been put back in his place, and the family's absolute authority was stronger than ever. With an air of supreme arrogance, Harrison dropped his heavy Platinum American Express card onto the silver tray. A minute later, the manager returned, looking visibly distressed. "I am so incredibly sorry, Mr. Sterling, but your card has been declined. Insufficient funds." Harrison scowled, adjusting his cufflinks. "What do you mean, insufficient funds? That's physically impossible. Run it again, or just use this one." He tossed an exclusive titanium black card onto the tray. 2 minutes later, the manager returned with the exact same apologetic wince. The same result. Harrison's face began to turn a deep, angry shade of purple. The few remaining socialites and executives lingering in the foyer started to watch the scene with growing curiosity. Harrison pulled out a third card, then a fourth. Declined. 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 Across all his massive accounts, where tens of millions of dollars were supposed to sit, there was suddenly nothing. The all-powerful patriarch, a man who believed he could buy the world, couldn't even cover the tab for a dinner party. Margaret stared at her husband in absolute horror. All the color drained from her perfectly lifted face. Their flawless, untouchable empire was cracking in front of their peers. Back at the diner, William was looking at me, the pain of 20 lost years etched into his features. He nodded slowly. The linoleum floor beneath my feet felt like it was tilting. Father. It was a word I had only ever known from my mother's vague bedtime stories. She always told me he was a good man, but that they had been forced to separate. She never went into the grim details, and as a child, I never pushed. Her love had always been enough for me, and now this man was sitting right in front of me, alive, real, and wealthy. But instead of joy, a massive wave of sharp, bitter resentment crashed over me. "Why?" I cried out, my voice cracking. "Why did you leave? Why did you abandon us? My mother never remarried. She dedicated every waking second of her life to keeping me fed. She worked 2 exhausting jobs just so I could have decent clothes for school. Where the hell were you?" The tears I had fought back all night finally spilled over, but this time, they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of pure fury. He didn't try to defend himself. He just sat there taking the brunt of my anger, looking at me with infinite patience. "I didn't leave because I wanted to, Lily," he began, quietly waiting until my sobbing subsided. "Back in the 90s, I had a startup business. I was young, ambitious, and dangerously naive. I ended up crossing paths with a very ruthless organized crime syndicate here in the city. One night, they cornered me and gave me an ultimatum. I either disappeared from Mary's life forever without saying a single word, or they would make sure both you and your mother disappeared permanently. They gave me 24 hours to leave the United States. I chose your lives, as he spoke. I could see the ghosts of those horrific memories haunting his eyes. I tried to get a message to Mary through people I thought I could trust, but they sold me out. They told her I had simply run off with another woman and stolen cash. I know she never fully believed them, but I couldn't prove anything without putting a target on her back. I left thinking it would be temporary. I thought in a year or two the heat would die down, the feds would bust them, and I could come home. But those people kept tabs on me for over a decade. I only managed to safely return to New York 3 years ago after the head of the syndicate finally died in federal prison. He took a slow sip of his coffee. I've been searching for you both ever since. I legally changed my last name years ago to avoid detection. When I finally tracked down your old apartment in Queens, the landlord told me Mary had passed away from illness and that you had gotten married and moved on. Nobody had a forwarding address. His story sounded like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, but looking into his eyes, I knew he was telling the absolute truth. Every deep line on his face spoke of decades of agonizing grief. How did you end up at that restaurant tonight? I asked, my voice reduced to a whisper. Pure coincidence. A stroke of luck that I can only describe as a miracle. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I was attending a corporate merger dinner in the private room next to yours. As my dinner wrapped up, I was heading to the coat check when I heard the maitre d' mention the Sterling family anniversary. I knew your husband's family name from various Wall Street circles. Out of curiosity, I glanced into the ballroom, and I saw you. You look exactly like Mary did when she was 22. I couldn't believe it. He paused, and the softness in his eyes was instantly replaced by a cold, hardened steel. I decided to sit at a table in the back and wait. I wanted to approach you later when you were alone, but then I watched that spoiled brat hit you, and I watched how his disgusting parents reacted. My brain was spinning. A long-lost father, the mob, 20 years of separation. And then my mind flashed back to the chaotic scene I had imagined at the restaurant, the phone call he made, the sudden panic I knew Harrison Sterling would face. Wait, I said, my hands shaking. That text you sent in the restaurant, the frozen accounts, that was you. William nodded calmly. Yes, it was the absolute bare minimum I could do. But how the Sterlings are practically untouchable in this city? They own politicians, judges, I protested. Influence is a very fragile illusion, Lily William replied. Harrison Sterling built his real estate and hedge fund empire in the late 90s, using a lot of dirty money shell companies and offshore tax havens. I deal with men like him globally. They always have weak points. While you were warming up in the car, I made a few more calls to some very powerful associates in Washington. Tomorrow morning, your father-in-law is going to receive a surprise visit from the IRS, the SEC, and the FBI. His accounts aren't frozen because of a glitch. I handed over a mountain of encrypted data regarding his decades of federal tax fraud and embezzlement to the right prosecutors. This isn't just revenge, sweetheart. It's justice. A man who encourages the abuse and humiliation of a woman doesn't deserve his wealth, and he certainly doesn't deserve his power. I sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of what was happening. My quiet, suffocating, submissive life had been utterly incinerated in a single night. And from the ashes, something entirely new, terrifyingly massive and protective was growing. Meanwhile, Julian's cell phone was blowing up. He was frantically dialing his private bankers, his father's lawyers, and their political connections, but everywhere he turned, he hit a brick wall of cold, automated messages or panicked assistants who had no answers. Harrison, pale and sweating through his custom tuxedo, paced the empty grand foyer of their Upper East Side townhouse like a trapped animal. He was a man accustomed to fixing felonies with a single phone call, but tonight, his diamond-encrusted smartphone was nothing more than a useless piece of glass. It's her. This is all because of that little tramp, Margaret suddenly screeched, her perfectly manicured finger, trembling violently. That gold-digging orphan brought a curse on this family. I always told you she was gutter trash. Julian, find her right now. Make her tell us who is doing this to us. Julian, crushed between his father's terrifying rage and his mother's manic hysteria, frantically dialed my number over and over. But my clutch containing my phone was still sitting quietly beneath a table at the restaurant, ringing into the void. Back at the diner, William paid the check with $100 bill and helped me back into his coat. Lily, you need a safe place to sleep tonight. That townhouse is no longer your home. Come with me. You'll be safe, you can sleep, and you can process all of this. I am not going to pressure you into anything. Whatever you decide to do with your life from this moment forward is entirely your choice. I looked up into his eyes, the eyes of my father. For the first time in my adult life, I saw the unconditional, fierce protection I had been starving for. I knew he was right. I could never, ever go back to Julian. I had crossed the point of no return. Okay, I said softly. Let's go. We rode to Manhattan in silence. I watched the neon lights of Times Square and the towering skyscrapers blur past the window, trying to mentally digest that my reality had fractured and rebuilt itself. I was no longer a lonely orphan, nor was I the despised, powerless daughter-in-law of a billionaire dynasty. I had a father who was formidable, decisive, and willing to burn the world down to keep me safe. The feeling of having solid ground beneath my feet was both intoxicating and completely overwhelming. The town car pulled into the private underground garage of an ultra-luxury high-rise in Tribeca. We took the private elevator straight to the penthouse. William unlocked the double doors, revealing a massive, sprawling apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the Manhattan skyline. Make yourself at home, Lily. Because this is your home now, he said. William's penthouse looked like a spread in Architectural Digest. It was sleek, minimalist, filled with imported Italian furniture and modern art, yet it felt slightly sterile. It felt like a high-end hotel suite where a man simply crashed between international flights rather than a place where someone truly lived. He led me down the hall to a massive guest suite. You can rest here. There's a brand new robe and slippers in the closet, and the master bath is fully stocked. We can talk in the morning, only if you want to. He spoke to me with such extreme care, as if a sudden loud noise might shatter me. I nodded in gratitude. When he closed the door behind him, I leaned against the heavy wood and let out a long breath. The massive adrenaline crash finally hit me. I took a long, scalding shower, scrubbing away the smell of the restaurant and the lingering taint of that humiliating evening. I wrapped myself in a thick, plush robe and collapsed into the king-sized bed. But sleep refused to come. The horrific loop of the night played over and over in my mind. Margaret's elitist sneer, Julian's terrifying rage, the sharp crack of his hand against my face, the pathetic silence of the crowd, and finally the unwavering, resolute gaze of the stranger who turned out to be my flesh and blood. I was awakened the next morning by the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso and sizzling bacon. I wandered out into the massive gourmet kitchen. William was standing by the marble island, flipping an omelet in a copper pan. A spread of fresh bagels, pastries, and fruit was already laid out. Good morning. Did you get any sleep? He asked, glancing over his shoulder. A little. Thank you, I lied politely. We ate breakfast in a heavy, complicated silence. The tension was palpable. We were bound by blood closer than anyone else in the world, yet we were essentially strangers trying to figure out how to speak to one another. After breakfast, we moved to the plush leather sofas in the living room. William leaned forward, clasping his hands. Lily, I know this is an overwhelming amount to process, but we need to strategize. Your husband is undoubtedly tearing the city apart looking for you, and men like Harris and Sterling don't just roll over. The first order of business is getting your personal belongings out of their house. I physically recoiled at the thought of stepping foot in that townhouse and seeing Julian's face again. I don't want to see them. I can't go back there, I whispered, my chest tightening. You don't have to, William replied with smooth, unwavering confidence. I've already handled it. My private security team will go to the house, pack up everything that belongs to you, and bring it directly here. I just need you to write down anything specific or sentimental they shouldn't miss. Secondly, you need a ruthless divorce attorney. I've already retained the most aggressive family law litigator in New York on your behalf. Everything was moving at lightning speed. 24 hours ago, I was a dependent, voiceless wife trapped in a gilded cage. Today, a billionaire was moving mountains to clear the debris from my life. Why are you doing all of this so fast? I asked, looking him dead in the eye. Is it guilt? He held my gaze for a long time before letting out a heavy, ragged sigh. Yes, Lily, I am drowning in guilt. It is completely suffocating. Every single day for the last 20 years, I thought about you and Mary. I imagined you learning to ride a bike, going to your high school prom, experiencing your first heartbreak, and I wasn't there to protect you. I can never buy back the time I lost, but I can and I will do absolutely everything in my power to ensure that your future is secure, happy, and entirely your own. I'm not asking you to call me Dad right now. I don't expect you to throw your arms around me. I just want you to let me take care of you the way I was supposed to all along." The raw, bleeding honesty in his voice began to thaw the thick layer of ice around my heart. I gave him a small, slow nod. Meanwhile, absolute chaos had descended upon the Sterling estate. They had spent the entire night in a frantic, terrifying downward spiral, failing to unfreeze their hedge funds or get a single politician on the phone. Everyone who had kissed Harrison's ring the day before suddenly treated him like a leper. And just as William had promised, the morning brought total destruction. A fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the Sterling's corporate headquarters on Wall Street, and dozens of federal agents from the FBI, SEC, and IRS swarmed the building. They seized servers, boxed up decades of fraudulent documents, and padlocked the executive suites. The impenetrable empire Harrison had ruthlessly built was being decimated hour by hour. Julian was losing his mind. He had spent the entire night redialing my number, pacing his bedroom, and by sunrise he was forced to watch the total collapse of his family's legacy on the morning news. "It was him," Margaret suddenly shrieked, dropping her iPad onto the Persian rug. "The man at the restaurant. The one at the back table. He was the only one who didn't look away when everything happened. And he walked out right after Lily did." Who the hell was he? Harrison rubbed his temples, his face pale and drawn. There was someone, a guest who wasn't on the original society list. Someone said his name was William. I can't remember the last name. He's a new player in the city, some massive international venture capitalist. Julian seized on the fragment of information. He sprinted to his home office and began frantically searching the internet for any major investor named William, who had recently moved to New York. There wasn't much personal information, but the financial footprint was staggering: a billionaire with deep, terrifying ties to global markets and Washington politics. But what did this ghost have to do with his quiet, submissive wife? Julian racked his brain, mentally reviewing everything I had ever told him about my past. Orphaned, mother died. I had never once mentioned my father. And then, a horrific realization hit him like a freight train. When we were applying for our marriage license, he had looked at my birth certificate. The space for father had been left blank, but under mother's maiden name, it clearly read Mary Donovan. I had told him my mother kept her maiden name out of pride. Julian felt the blood drain entirely from his body. He turned back to his monitors and typed in the name of the mysterious titan who was currently dismantling his life. William Donovan. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening crunch. "Mom." "Dad? I know who he is!" Julian yelled, stumbling out of his office and into the grand parlor where his parents were screaming at their useless defense attorneys. "That man, he's Lily's father. Her biological father." Harrison and Margaret froze. They stared at their son. First came total denial, then slow comprehension, and finally absolute paralyzing terror. They hadn't just bullied and publicly humiliated a poor, defenseless orphan. They had viciously abused the only daughter of a man who possessed the wealth and power to completely wipe them off the face of the earth, and he was already doing it. That realization was infinitely more terrifying than an SEC indictment. In that moment, Julian felt something much deeper than fear. He remembered the look on my face when his hand struck my cheek. The shock, the profound agony, and the ultimate irreversible death of my love for him. He realized that he hadn't just lost a trophy wife he could easily replace. He had permanently destroyed the only human being on the planet who had loved him for his heart rather than his trust fund. And he had done it with his own two hands. For the first time in his pampered, miserable life, Julian experienced genuine, suffocating remorse. Later that afternoon, as William's private security team carefully carried the boxes of my belongings into the penthouse, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the sprawling grid of New York City. The city didn't feel so overwhelming and alien anymore. I felt like I had spent 20 years wandering blindly through a thick fog, and suddenly the wind had blown it all away. Every box they set down represented a chapter of my past that I was finally closing. I dug through one of my totes and pulled out my smartphone. When I turned it on, the screen exploded with dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and frantic texts from Julian. "Lily, where are you? Please pick up. I'm so sorry. We need to talk. I can explain everything, please." I stared at the messages, feeling absolutely nothing. I deleted the thread without reading the rest and powered the phone off. There was nothing left to explain. William walked up beside me and placed a warm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. I turned to him, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine, unburdened smile broke across my face. "Yes, I think everything is going to be fine now." Around noon the following day, the penthouse intercom buzzed loudly. William checked the security feed on the tablet. His expression hardened into a mask of pure stone. "It's Julian. He's down in the lobby. You make the call, Lily. Do you want to see him, or should I have building security throw him out onto the street? I will respect whatever you decide." My heart gave a brief, painful flutter. A small, conditioned part of my brain wanted to hide in the bedroom, but a new, fierce part of my soul knew that I had to be the one to hammer the final nail into this coffin. "Send him up," I said, my voice steady and firm. "But I will only speak to him in this room with you standing right beside me." William gave a sharp nod and authorized the elevator. A few minutes later, the heavy doors opened and Julian stepped into the foyer. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant heir I had married. His custom Tom Ford suit was severely wrinkled, his tie was gone, he had dark, bruised bags under his eyes, and his hair was an oily mess. He looked completely broken. His desperate eyes darted from me to William and back again. "Lily," he started, his voice cracking pathetically. He took a hesitant step toward me, but William smoothly stepped into his path, blocking him entirely. "You can speak from right there," my father stated, his voice radiating sub-zero hostility. Julian swallowed hard, taking a step back. "Lily, please, forgive me. I don't know what came over me. I was a coward. I was a complete idiot. My entire life, I've been utterly terrified of my father, terrified of his anger, of losing my place in the family. And that night, I panicked. But what I did to you is unforgivable." When I found out who this man was, he gestured weakly toward William. It all clicked. I finally understood the magnitude of what I had done. "I'm not here to beg you to come back. I know that's impossible. I needed to look you in the eye and apologize from the bottom of my heart," as he spoke. Tears actually welled up in his eyes and spilled over his cheeks. For the first time in the entire duration of our relationship, I was looking at genuine, unscripted tears of remorse. "Your parents are also begging for forgiveness. They've been calling my offices all morning, offering to do anything to get their pathetic lives back," William interjected coldly. Julian dropped his gaze to the floor. "Yes, it's true," he admitted in defeat. "But that's not why I'm standing here. I came here for you, Lily. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, and I deserve every bit of this. I looked at the man I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel anger. I just felt a hollow emptiness and a tiny fleeting pang of pity for the years I had wasted on a boy who was too weak to protect the woman he claimed to love. I actually believe that you're sorry, Julian," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "But being sorry doesn't fix it. You struck me in front of a room full of people simply because you were frightened by your father's glare. You let your mother verbally trample me for years. You didn't just ruin a birthday party. You completely destroyed my trust in you forever. I am filing the divorce papers tomorrow morning. Goodbye, Julian." I turned my back on him and walked toward my bedroom, having absolutely no desire to prolong the autopsy of our marriage. I heard William say something sharp and low to Julian before the heavy front doors finally clicked shut. When I walked back out into the living room, my father was waiting for me. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and pulled me into a fierce, crushing hug, the kind of hug a father should have been giving his daughter for the last 20 years. And I cried. But they were good tears. They were tears of profound relief, washing away the last remnants of my toxic past. A week later, I sat down with William's high-powered attorneys. The divorce proceedings were brutal, rapid, and incredibly one-sided. Julian didn't contest a single clause. He signed away everything in absolute silence. His family, however, lost practically everything. The feds seized the Upper East Side townhouse, the sprawling Hamptons estate, and their fleet of luxury cars. Harrison narrowly avoided a federal prison sentence by cooperating with the SEC, but his reputation on Wall Street was completely incinerated. The Sterlings were forced to relocate to a modest, cramped apartment in a lesser borough, and Julian had to swallow his pride and find an entry-level corporate job just to keep the lights on for his parents. I never once asked about them again. It was their bed, and they had to lie in it. My life, on the other hand, was just beginning. With William's encouragement, I enrolled in classes at Parsons School of Design, finally pursuing the creative passion I had buried to play the role of the perfect, obedient trophy wife. My father gave me the seed money to open my own high-end floral design studio in Soho, granting me the independence and joy I had always craved. Slowly, day by day, William and I rebuilt the decades we had lost. He would tell me stories about his youth, with my mother showing me old photographs while I filled him in on my childhood memories and my hopes for the future. We were learning step by step how to be a real family. Sometimes late at night, we would sit out on the massive terrace of the penthouse, drinking coffee, and watching the endless sea of lights glittering across the Manhattan skyline. On one of those crisp nights, William looked over at me and sighed softly. "You know, Lily, they say it's always darkest right before the dawn." I looked at my father and smiled warmly. "No, Dad. Sometimes for the sun to finally rise, you just have to wait for the exact right person to come along, even if it takes 20 years." At that exact moment, looking out over the city that was finally mine, I realized I was truly, completely happy. Justice had been served, but watching the people who broke me suffer wasn't the real victory. The real prize was finally finding my own strength and getting my family back.